Change Communication, Chapter 10. Change communication is using communication to change perceptions and expectations. It makes demands on people. And basically, people do not like change. So change is not something that's easy for people. But if companies are going to succeed, if they're going to continue into the future, one of the things they have to do is to continuously change and remake themselves. The learning objectives in this chapter are explain how change communication makes demands, how it is perception and is expectations. Explain why information and communication differ, yet are interdependent. Describe the three purposes of Barrett's strategic employee communication model. Understand how a manager leads change communication. Explain why change communication requires receptivity and changing practices. And understand how to change communication practices in order to keep your firm up to date and on the edge. Change communication. It's making demands, it's the perception of the people who have to change, and it's expectations of anyone who has anything to do with the company. First, let's look at demands. What are you asking people that work for you to do? Are these things they're capable of doing? Are they what they believe in? You need to make sure that you sell people on what you are doing. And when you look at a number of companies like IBM who completely changed themselves, this is not an easy thing to do. And one of the things you have to realize is that as you go through this change, some people don't want the changes and they're going to leave. And it may not just be lower level people, it could be actually people who are in management. So while you're going through the changes, you're also going to be losing and hiring lots of people. If the change is really going to happen, it has to be embraced. You as the manager have to live the change. You have to show them that you are doing it. This means you need to meet with them. You need to talk to all of them. You need to have a lot of two-way conversations going on. It's perception. And do the people who are going to be affected by this change or who are expected to implement this change, do they feel it's fair or unfair? You know, if they feel a lot of people are being let go or a lot of people are leaving because they're unhappy, they may see it as unfair. So this is one of the reasons why you have to lead the way. You have to show it's going to make a better workplace in the long run. And there has to be a lot of communication to do this. You can't simply use formal communication channels. You must use informal communication channels as well. And it's important to get to people at all levels of the company. So go to coffee clutches. Have sit-downs with small groups of people. Get them to talk. Get them to let out what their fears are so that you can put those fears to rest. And it's expectations. They need to understand so that they can assimilate. Because if they don't understand and they don't assimilate, the change is not going to happen. It needs to include everyone, which means you're going to be very busy selling this whole process. It can lead to some negative employee morale and productivity. Hopefully those will be temporary. When you find that this is happening, you need to go out and address these people. And you need to persuade them that it's going to be a better work environment in the long run. And use the formal lines, but also use the grapevine. Use all the informal lines of communication. They're all very important. Information and communication are not the same thing. Companies have tons of information. In fact, when you go to work for a company, one of the things you're going to find very quickly is you probably have information you don't even need to do your job. But for some reason, you're on the list and you're going to get a copy of it, be it by technology or in a printed form. Communication is actually talking or communicating with others in some form through some channel. And it's done to basically persuade people, to allow people to understand what you're talking about. Information is logic, and communication is perception. Information is very formal and very impersonal. Communication is interpersonal. You can't generally have a whole lot of communication with yourself, though our thought processes are a form of communication. But in an organization, to get things done, you actually have to share your ideas with others. And it's in the sharing of those ideas that you actually are tearing the information apart and deciding what is important and how to interpret that information. Without communication, there isn't a lot of interpretation going on. Barrett's strategic employee communication model can be very useful. Basically, it shows how you can make major changes in a firm and how those changes maybe will succeed or fail. And it shows how to synthesize information into communication, how to distribute it to people so they can actually use it to make the changes in the organization that you want. And it helps management achieve strategic goals. And it includes all levels of management. And this is probably the most important thing. Anytime you're communicating, that information needs to go down through all levels so that everyone understands exactly what it is that's expected of them. There's 3 phases. You perform an analysis, first of all, to see what you're doing, and if what you're doing is going to be helpful or if it needs to be changed. Then you decide, okay, I want to change this. So then what you need to do is you need to decide how you want to get that message across. Do you want to bring everyone together? Do you want to do workshops? Just what is the best way to get the message out? There needs to be changes. There's 5 actions that you can take along these 3 phases. 1 is forming strategic communication team and let them work on the problem. You can assess current communication practices. You can conduct cascading vision, strategy, and job redefinition workshops. I mean, you can only imagine at IBM the changes they had to make here in order to change themselves from basically a hardware company to a software and an ideas company. And then you need to tie the change communication strategies back into the functional areas across the management tiers, and you need to have feedback, lots and lots of feedback. Next, we're going to look at Figure 10.1. Figure 10.1 shows how you take each phase, the perform, analysis, design, the refine communication, workshops, and then the feedback and the feed forwarding. One of the things you have to remember is each level of management has the 4 functions that they have to do. They have the planning, the organizing, the leading, and the controlling. So while they're trying to communicate changes, they need to make sure they are done through all 4 levels and through all tiers of management. And one of the things that's important is to make sure everybody's getting the same message. Because remember, one of the things that happens is you try and do anything. If you start a comment at one point, by the time the comment gets to the 100th person, it may actually look very differently than when it started. So you want to be very careful how you communicate your changes so that it gets to the bottom layer the same way as it started at the top layer. So form a strategic communication team, assess your current communication needs, and then develop a change communication plan. Next, you need to develop and test the messages you're sending out. Have some workshops, have people give you feedback. See how much they're embracing the changes and how much work you have yet to do. And then the third step is to continue on with the feedback and continue on until things have actually changed and people are happy, they have made the changes, and things are running well. It's not a quick process. No one can really give you a timetable. This has first month phase, second month phase, third month phase. Actually, these phases could take a lot longer in duration, depending on how widespread the changes are. And it's a constant sell on management's part to make these changes actually happen. And if management is not basically playing the roles themselves and doing the changes, you're not going to get the lower people to do the changes. Basically, what this chart shows is that anytime you have change, it is overlaid on the 4 functional areas. And it has to be completely immersed in all of those areas. And it has to be immersed both with management and the staff. Everyone has to do an ongoing assessment of what they're doing and how they're changing in order to make sure the changes are carried forward properly. Managers lead change communication, and they use people within the firm to help them do this. And the ones basically who sound alarms and provide early warning signs that things may not be going well are the Cassandras. And these people give you lots of feedback and are very useful to you, because without them, you may not realize. You may be in your little cocoon thinking everything is going just fine, when in fact everything is falling apart around you, kind of like Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burned. Networkers, they know the organizational landscape and the right people to contact who can persuade other people to get things done. These people can be very helpful to you because they're going to persuade others to do very well. They're going to persuade others to believe you, and they're going to then themselves change. So these people are very, very helpful. They also give you a lot of feedback. The influencers are the ones that can adjust and change attitudes. They're the real persuasive people, and hopefully they're the shapers that you have in the right places in the organization to actually make the changes happen. Managers must communicate the message, and it needs to be very clear without any kind of problem. They need to know these chief communicators, and they need to know how to persuade them and get them to buy in so that they have more than just themselves out there selling these ideas. And the content needs to be rich. You need to use words that will paint pictures in people's minds of how things are going to be better after the change than they are now. If they don't see things being better, why should they change? Bemis's social architecture is another way of saying organizational culture. I'm sure you have found out by now in your business courses that we love to have different names for the same thing. There's basically 3 styles of social architecture. There's the collegial, the personalistic, and the formalistic. And basically, the collegial is used by places like universities and engineering firms. Personalistic is where the founder's personality is very woven throughout the company. Apple and Steve Jobs, FedEx, Fred Smith, these are examples of companies where the person's personality has very much driven the organization. And then you have very formalistic, which definitely is the government, but also can involve a lot of other business organizations. And basically, what you are trying to do with change is you're changing the organizational culture. Because if you were a manufacturing company and now you're an idea company, that's a completely different way of looking at things. And it's going to require major changes of individuals who can stay on. And as I said before, many people will choose not to do that. They'll choose to leave rather than make those changes. Managers lead. So how they lead with their communication is very important. They can share activities with people. They can share their vision. They can have very rich agendas. They can transmit an image that they have. They can induce enthusiasm and commitment. They can build trust, and they can foster positive emotions. This is one of the things President Obama did with his first campaign. He used the word change, only he never defined what change meant. And everyone put their own definition of what change was. And so some people were very happy with the changes he came forth with, and some were not. He did not truly sell his idea of change. He just put the idea that change was going to happen. And people quickly learned you really need to know what he's talking about when he says change, because it isn't always something you want. The communication channel chosen by a manager is very important. You know, the more face-to-face they can have at all levels within the organization, the more people are going to believe that the leader is engaged and that he cares about everyone. The manager must walk the walk if they want everyone else to change. So you need to have lots of meetings, lots of texting, lots of emailing, lots of development to make sure that everybody is on board with the changes that you are suggesting. Key things people are looking for when you're doing change communication. One is, can they believe you? Do they believe you're the real deal, that you're authentic? Are you speaking as a leader? And also, are you basically listening for understanding, and are you listening for feedback? Are you learning from what you're hearing in this feedback? And then, are they acting upon what you have asked them to do? So is the change really happening? Remember, we said communication basically has 3 parts. And the last part is that you maintain a relationship, a positive relationship, because a negative relationship is going to hurt you. So some of the things you do have to think about at the beginning is, how long is this change going to really take? What's the duration from beginning to end before it's completely effective? Do you have the right people in the right spots to carry out the change? Is there integrity, or is there not integrity in these people? Is everyone committed? Because if somebody in the chain is not committed, they can sabotage the entire change that you're trying to put into place. And then how much effort is everyone willing to put in to actually achieve this change? And that's a major requirement, because many times it takes extra work. It's harder to change an organization than it is just to go on with it as it's been every day. And many times, unless you persuade them and make them understand, the workers may not understand that it can't go on. Like Kodak, that it's all going to fall apart and no one's going to have a job. So you have to make the changes for tomorrow in order to make sure you still have a job tomorrow. So a leader is going to be doing many things. They're going to be walking the walk. They're going to be doing exactly what they're asking their people to do. They're going to be using both formal and informal channels of information. They need to build relationships or rebuild relationships. People need to see them as being the real deal, as being honest. And they need to talk as a leader. They also need to listen, and they need to make changes where changes are necessary. And they need to act on what they have learned. Because change isn't always going to be implemented exactly as you originally saw it, because probably you didn't see how the changes are then going to affect other things. Because you don't do all positions in the firm. So you need to depend on the people that do those positions to give you feedback on, yes, this can work, or I think I have a better way of doing this, since we're going to make these changes anyway. I cannot say it enough. When you're doing change and you have strategic goals, it's good if everybody was in the formation of making these strategic goals, but the manager is the catalyst for the strategic realignment. So they must be part of the process. Some things you're going to have to align is structural changes. What structures are you going to change, and how are those going to affect everyone who's left? How is the culture of the organization going to change? And sometimes this may mean you're going to go global, you're going to outsource something. So how is that going to change how you interface with that group of people that were doing the function maybe in-house before, and now they're doing the function out-of-house? You're going to have lots of training and development so that people are comfortable with their new assignments. And because you're going to lose people, you're also going to be in the middle of a lot of recruitment and hiring. You may have to allocate your resources differently. But if you take away from one silo, you've got to make sure they understand why it's happening and why someone else needs the money. Because if you take too much away, they may not buy in, and they may try to sabotage the whole thing. You've got to have leadership. As the manager, you have to be a leader, but then you have to develop other leaders under you to carry the message all the way to the bottom. You've got to make sure that your information systems are in line with what you're doing. Since these take a long time to change, many times it's necessary to start this process way before you actually make the changes. Reward people for changing. It's very important as you go through any change process that there are rewards along the line. As you bring up new systems and they're actually made to work, reward people. Have a luncheon. Pat them on the back. You can't do too much of this. It's difficult for them also, because in the back of their mind, they're always wondering if they're still going to have a job. You need to coordinate all the mechanisms that are going on within your company. And you need to control systems. You need to make sure that the systems people actually understand what the new demands are going to be on them and how they have got to change the information systems so that they will work well. I've been saying throughout this entire narration that managers' behaviors are the most important and that they have to lead by doing. And you can't say this too much, because leadership is very much what a manager is all about. You can't be a manager if you don't want to lead. So basically, you always want to make sure that you have people in management positions who do want to lead. They want to take on the responsibilities of not only the good things that happen in an organization, but the bad things that happen in an organization. A leader is going to be somebody who communicates. They're going to be somebody who comes up with strategies and then is able to explain these strategies to those who actually have to make them work. They're going to be a person who says resources have to be utilized. They're not infinite. They're finite. And sometimes we have to change things. Sometimes we're going to have more of this. Sometimes we're going to have more of that. You've heard of firms that are marketing-oriented or engineering-oriented, and basically no firm is good when they have unbalanced areas. Basically, the more balanced the areas are and the more they work together, the better off the organization is going to be. A leader makes the organization and the people within it see themselves as responsible, which means if they see something can be done better, it behooves them to go to management and make suggestions. You've got to make sure that managers know this is part of their job. You need to know with whom the manager is communicating, and are they actually getting that information down to their lowest employee. Who is training the employees? And basically, are the employees being given all the tools and materials they need to make sure the job is done correctly? And then who will be watching to see that these changes are done? It should be everyone in the organization. But you do need to check from time to time to actually make sure things are being done as they were intended. And if there needs to be changes, that more changes, are then done. Before managers communicate, they need to think about what they're doing. And Ronald Reagan was probably one of the greatest communicators in the 20th century. Having an acting background actually helped him in his presidency. He was able to get messages across more succinctly and get more done in Congress than a lot of presidents. Because he didn't think about who was a Democrat or who was a Republican. He thought about what it was he wanted to change. And then he called in the people necessary and got everyone working on the same page. So first of all, why as a manager are you communicating? Is it necessary? What are the people you are communicating with thinking? Are they buying in? Are they simply saying, oh, it's another one of his lame ideas? You need to determine what you want to say and what the best way is to get that message across before you ever say a thing. You're going to know it works when you see people actually implementing it, because they see you as being authentic and honest and someone they want to follow. People are only leaders because others give them that title. Nobody can make you a leader. They can give you ideas which will help you become a leader, but they cannot make you a leader. Randy Harrington of Extreme Arts and Sciences in Eugene, Oregon. He does 2 sessions on campus for us in our MBA program. He does Speaker's Edge, which is basically the first 2 weeks of January. And then for the on-campus people, he does a variation of this course, which is basically mainly leadership and communication. But his whole point is, you can't communicate with people and you can't lead people unless you make connections with them. So first of all, you must make connections with them, and they must see you as being an honest person they want to follow. And also remember, the most convenient channel may not be the most effective. While you can send an email to everyone and everyone's going to get the message, you may need to stop in and talk with some of those people on an individual level in order for them to buy into what you're doing. So what helps a manager connect? Basically, you can discuss your experiences and what you see as the employees' experiences. Remember, they're your audience, and before you ever communicate, the number one thing you have to think about is your audience and what you want them to remember. You need to stay away from corporate speak. You need to talk to the person on their level where they understand what this change is going to do to their position. Don't have just a company line that you recite. You need to make that information mean something to that individual. You need to show that individual that you care about them and their position. And if that employee has any uncertainty, you need to address it and make sure it's taken care of. Because if it's not, there's going to be problems. There'll be productivity that falls off, or there'll be sabotage because they won't like where you're going. To change people's receptivity to new ideas in a firm, there's a number of things that Suchin has come up with that you can do, and they're good ideas. They're a good place to start if you don't know where to start. Learn about the people who are going to have to make the change and decide what are their triggers that will make them trust you and make them make the changes. And this is where personality can be very important, and of course your past history. If you lie to people and then you want them to change, they're probably not going to trust you. So these are relationships that you've built over time. It's why it's so difficult for a new CEO coming into a corporation to immediately start making changes. People have no reason to trust them. You have to earn that trust. You may be the CEO, but you can only be a leader because people want to follow. And a leader has to have followers, or they're not a leader. Describe the change in broad ways so that people can see basically how it's going to affect the entire firm and then how it's going to affect layers within the firm. Dialogue, talking, that'll have more to do with changing people's cognitive knowledge and changing how they think about the change than anything else. Talking with people is important. Use training, use feedback. Make sure those loops are always open. And then make sure your organizational systems are aligned with the changes. People and change. As Fromm and Brown say, change is always going to be resisted. It's just a natural proclivity for people. We don't just like change for change's sake. You know, there's times when, like when you graduate college and you have to go get a job, you know you have to do it, and you do it, but you're scared of it. And they say that people should never make 3 major changes at the same time in their life, because that will tend to lead to depression. So change is one of those things that the human being is just not readily going to take to. It can be resisted, it can cause fatigue, and while you're going through change, you're going to have some positives, some neutrals, and some negatives. It's not all going to be positive, but what do you hope as a manager is that there's a lot more positives than the neutrals or negatives. Also, as a manager, you don't want to be making change for change's sake. You know, people need to understand there's a need for this change. It needs to be a positive. If you don't have that, you're probably going to have a lot of personnel turnover, and generally that's not something you want to have. And it's very interesting that as a new CEO comes into a company, he may want to make change, but first he's got to be accepted as a leader, because it's only through their trust of him that people will be able to fight not wanting to change and have a more positive outcome. Wiggins' change curve communication model is useful. Basically, in quadrant 1 is when an employee finds out about the news and they want more information. And basically, one of their first questions and concerns is going to be about themselves. Are they still going to have a position? And how is it going to change things for them? If, in fact, you know you're going to keep employees, you need to put this one to rest immediately. In quadrant 2 is when the news becomes real and the employees need support to actually make the changes. They need training. They need to be able to trust their managers so they can actually go through this and learn whatever it is you want to change. Quadrant 3 is where the employees begin to focus on the future. It's where they begin to really see the vision of the original change. They've bought into it, and they're going, okay, I see where this is going. I see why this is necessary. You know, if I want to be a Kodak employee, I've got to make these changes happen or this company's not going to be here. So it's not just about me wanting to make these changes. It's about me needing to make these changes for the welfare of the corporation's continuance. And in quadrant 4 is when employees have accepted the changes and they see themselves as part of that goal, as part of that team. And they basically have said, okay, CEO, you are my leader. Manager, you are my leader. And I'm willing to follow you. Tell me what to do. Changing communication practices. I hope one of the things you've gotten out of this chapter is the fact it's not just the employees who have to change sometimes, but it's the leaders, it's the managers. They've got to change how they are communicating. And in this world today that is becoming more technology-driven, it's going to be more difficult to make changes than ever before, because people still need to see things in writing and they need to be told things verbally. So we need to make sure our communication patterns fit what we're trying to do. And sometimes there's overlap between the new and the old, which will actually help the changes happen. But managers must communicate wherever the people they are managing are. They must use the appropriate media. Suchin has put this into 5 stages. There's a trigger that links the strategic intent. And what you have to do is find that trigger within the people who actually have to implement that strategic change. You have to put it within goals that they see are important. They have to see a reason for changing. And I've said this a million times in this particular chapter, but talk with your employees. Listen to their feedback. And if necessary, make changes. Because sometimes they're the people actually doing the work, and they know better than you. So it's important that you listen to them. And then make sure all your IT systems are in place to support the changes you're making. Being at a university for a long time, I have seen lots of IT changes that have gone through. And this last semester there was one, and if you were a student at Ole Miss, you're very aware of it. In the middle of the semester, they changed the home page. And, I mean, you students are very technology savvy. But in the middle of the semester, to change that home page, most students found very disorienting. That wasn't something they wanted to have to deal with at that point in time. It probably would have made a whole lot more sense to have made that change between semesters rather than in the middle of a semester. So always think about your timing. Is this the optimal timing to be doing this? Or should I be thinking about another time?